Imagine you run a nonprofit in New York City. You have active government contracts. You are delivering services, real services to real people in need every single day. And you've submitted your invoices on time. You've done everything right. But you still can't make payroll. Not because the money doesn't exist. Oh, it exists. You look great on paper. Your revenue looks very good. But the cash? That cash is sitting in a government account somewhere. It's your money, but you can't get to it. Hi, welcome back to the Nonprofit CFO. Last episode we talked about 2011 when 275,000 nonprofits lost their tax-exempt status in a single day. If you missed that one, you can check it out on the channel. It was my first episode, so be nice. Cash flow issues can catch even financially stable, well-run organizations completely off guard. That's because there is a substantial difference between what is on your profit and loss statement or your income statement and what's in your bank account. Even if you're looking at your balance sheet, your assets can look great. Your accounts receivable line is huge, but unfortunately it's not accounts received. When these numbers diverge, when your reports do not align with your bank account, this can be a real crisis. Even when you've done nothing wrong. Even when, like some of these New York City nonprofits, you have the contracts, you have the grants, you've completed the services, and you've submitted your invoices correctly. Today we're going to look at this up close, not in the abstract, but with real organizations, in real life, and real consequences. New York City contracts with nonprofits for about $8 billion in human services support every year. We're talking about food programs, housing support, mental health support, youth and elderly programs. The kind of work that the government can't do itself or can't do efficiently, but recognizes as vital for its community, so contracts out with nonprofit organizations to do in its stead. Here's how it's supposed to work. The city signs a contract. The nonprofit starts delivering services. The city then pays the nonprofit for those services, often as a reimbursement after the fact when invoices are submitted. Simple. But here's one situation where it didn't work. According to the New York City Comptroller's Office in fiscal year 2024, 90% of all nonprofit contracts were registered late by the government agency holding them. 90. This means nonprofits were showing up to complete those contracts, paying their people, paying for services, all before the city was anywhere near ready to pay them for it. And let me be really clear, this is certainly an egregious instance, but is by no means a problem exclusive to New York City. This is a nonprofit sector problem. The reimbursement model, where you do the work, submit the contract, and are paid later for it, is how a huge portion of government grant funding works across the whole country. You do the work, submit the invoice, and then wait. 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, or in this case, 6 months or more. And while you wait, your staff still needs to be paid. That rent is still due. And it's not like the people at these government agencies are doing this because they're not good at their jobs. No, the reimbursement model is tried. It's trusted. It helps ensure that government funds are going to services that the government wants to pay for. But the truth is that most small and mid-sized nonprofits simply don't have the cash laying around to backfill unpaid contracts. New York City Comptroller Brad Lander, the guy whose office published the report from earlier, put it plainly. He said, when nonprofits cannot make payroll, are behind on their rents, and must take out loans because the city is consistently late to pay, we are ultimately letting down New Yorkers who rely on these organizations for services. $861 million, 4,000 invoices, sitting there unpaid. Yeah, I'd say that's a lot of letdown. The Human Services Council of New York, an umbrella organization that works with around 170 nonprofits in New York at the time, in 2021 surveyed its members about this late payment issue. They found that the issue was widespread across all nonprofit sectors. For organizations under $25 million in annual budget, which was most of the survey, an average of 12% of their total annual operating budget was sitting in delayed payments. For a small organization running on $1 million a year, that's $120,000, sitting in basically reimbursables. One nonprofit leader described it this way. Every 2 weeks, I go through the same anxiety. Will we have enough cash to make payroll? This is an organization that carries $1.5 million or more in state receivables at any given time. By looking at the profit and loss report, they seem healthy. tons of recorded revenue, but low on cash. Michelle Jackson, CEO of the Human Services Council, said, "It's definitely the worst it's been." She also said something else that I think is worth sitting with. She asked, "Is this a sustainable model?" It's a good question. And for one organization, at least, the answer turned out to be no. Sheltering Arms was founded in 1823. Oh, that is not a typo. 1823. 200 years of serving New York's most vulnerable children and families. Foster services, youth homelessness shelters, mental health services, residential programs across all 5 boroughs. At its peak, Sheltering Arms was serving more than 17,000 children and families every single year. And in February 2023, CEO Elizabeth McCarthy announced that Sheltering Arms would be shutting down. McCarthy was direct about why. She cited, and I'm quoting from the organization's own statement, financial challenges resulting from the pandemic, combined with chronic underfunding and late government payments. But the quote that I keep coming back to, and the one that I think explains this crisis better than any data point we've talked about so far, is what she told Gothamist. She said, "If I built a bridge for the city and they stopped paying me for 18 months, I'd stop building the bridge." Kind of makes sense. One of the reasons for this is the Department of Education, one of Sheltering Arms' major clients, had agreed to only reimburse 75% of their costs in the prior year. This left Sheltering Arms millions behind in the cash it needed to pay rent, make payroll, and cover insurance. Their 2020 financial statement showed what Gothamist called razor-thin reserves. They brought in about $99.2 million and spent all but $66,000 of it. This meant that by 2021, their $66,000 reserve was a tightrope. And when the contract payments slowed and the reimbursements got delayed, the contracts dragged behind, there was nothing to bridge the gap. No reserve to draw from. There was nothing between the organization and the bottom. Yeah, Sheltering Arms transferred its programs to other nonprofits and filed for bankruptcy in 2024. 200 years of institutional knowledge, service to the community, gone. Now, I've been talking about New York City because the data here is so well documented and some of the stories are so vivid and so specific, but this is not a New York City problem. And this is also not a problem of the city government destroying the nonprofit sector. This is about a sector that has operated in such a way that it just needed one little shove and it was over the cliff. And the situation is even more dire for the nonprofits that live even closer to the brink. The Nonprofit Finance Fund surveyed nonprofits specifically about their cash reserves. They found that 62% of Black, Indigenous, and people of color-led nonprofits in New York have 3 months or less of cash on hand, compared to 41% of white-led organizations. Which means that this crisis doesn't hit everyone equally. I mean, does it ever? These organizations with the least cushion, often the most community embedded, sometimes the only ones who are trusted by the populations they serve, they are left the most exposed when these payments are late. The good news, and there is some, is that the noise has gotten loud enough that legislators are starting to respond. The New York City Council passed legislation requiring city contracts to pay 50% of the contract value up front at time of registration. New York City Council member Adrian Adams put it simply, saying, "This is not a loan or a handout to contractors. This is the city paying its own bills on time." Kristen Miller, Executive Director of Homeless Services United, testified at the hearing. Her member organizations had been owed hundreds of millions of dollars dating back to 2019. She said, "Our members continue to provide services despite not being paid. This means that some of our member organizations are forced to take out lines of credit to pay day-to-day expenses. Make no mistake, this is a crisis." The state of Maryland created an interest-free micro-bridge loan program specifically to help nonprofits survive while waiting on government contract payments. Other states are watching. Reform is happening, slowly, imperfectly, but it is happening. But reform couldn't come fast enough for organizations like Sheltering Arms. They couldn't weather that storm. CEO Elizabeth McCarthy said shutting it down was devastating. Of course it was. 200 years of serving families. And what I keep coming back to with this story is that it wasn't bad actors behaving badly that caused this downfall. It was a structural problem with how nonprofits got paid, combined with razor-thin reserves that left no room for error. This is the operating reality for thousands of nonprofits across the country. Razor-thin margins that leave us vulnerable to outside forces. In order to combat it, nonprofits across the country have to start prioritizing operating reserves when we create our budgets. This can mean a line of credit if you are fortunate enough to be able to have assets enough that the bank will give you a line of credit. But if they don't, then you have to build your own. You have to build your own by baking in operating reserves every year when you go about your budgeting process. And listen, I know how hard this is. I'm in these budgeting conversations with clients every year, but we have to, even when it means delivering a little bit less service for a few years while we build up some cash reserves. It is necessary. It is the only way to keep us somewhat insulated from funding choices and the whims of government. The organizations to survive this environment are not necessarily the ones with the best programs, or the most dedicated staff, or even the most resonant missions. Now, the ones who survive are the ones who know, before the crisis hits, that their revenue they're owed is not the same as their cash, and who build their financial management systems around that reality. In our next episode, we're going to talk about Zero Divide, a San Francisco nonprofit who raised $50 million over the course of its life, and the choices that it made when its unrestricted cash ran low. It's a story about restricted funding, about a board who might have known what was happening and didn't stop it, and about the California Attorney General who eventually showed up and started to ask some very uncomfortable questions. So leave a like if you want to, subscribe for more. I'm Evan, I'm the Nonprofit CFO. I'll see you in the next one. And if any of this resonates with where your organization is right now, my firm, Tucker Business Services, works with nonprofits just like yours every day. From bookkeeping to budgeting and more, we're here to help. Our link's in the description.